The hole wanted to be deeper, but John's shoulder couldn't take no more digging. He stood in it anyway, 3 feet down in the red clay, and figured Mary wouldn't mind lying a bit closer to the surface than most. She never did care much for formality. He climbed out and dragged the pine box to the edge. Plain wood, no handles. He'd cut and planed the boards himself over 2 days, while she lay wrapped in bedsheets in the cool of the storm cellar. The box slid into the hole and landed with a sound that made John's chest hurt worse than his shoulder ever could. He filled it in. Took an hour. The sun hammered down on his neck and his shirt stuck to his back. When the mound sat proper, he tamped it with the flat of the shovel, then drove the cross in at the head. White pine, same as the box. He'd burned her name into it with a heated poker. Mary Gantry, 1847-187, for beloved? The word beloved didn't seem like enough, but John couldn't think what else to carve. He stood there until the sun started dropping behind the ridge, then walked back to the house. His boots left prints in the dust. Everything out here left prints: lizards, snakes, wind. A man couldn't pass through without marking the land. The porch steps creaked. They'd been creaking for 2 years, and he kept meaning to fix them, but Mary said she liked the warning when he came home. Said it gave her time to compose herself, though she never looked nothing but composed, far as John could tell. He sat on the top step and looked at the ridge, where the cross stood dark against the orange sky. His hands still had clay under the nails. He picked at it, but the dirt wouldn't come out. Something moved in the scrub oak down past the well. John watched it. His pistol sat inside on the table by the door, but he didn't reach for it. Whatever moved in the brush made noise like it didn't care who heard. Not a cat, not a coyote. Those animals moved quiet. A dog came out from the scrub. Maybe 2 years old, brown and white patches, ribs showing through its coat. It had burrs stuck in its fur, and one ear bent wrong like something had got hold of it once. The dog stopped 20 feet from the porch and sat down in the dirt. John didn't move. The dog watched him. Its tongue hung out one side of its mouth. "Ain't got nothing for you," John said. The dog stood up, walked 3 steps closer, sat down again. "Mean it? Nothing here." The dog tilted its head like it was thinking that over. Then it lay down in the dust with its head on its paws and watched John with brown eyes that looked old for such a young animal. John figured it would leave when the dark came full and cold set in. He stood up and went inside, left the door open. The house felt wrong without Mary moving through it. He could still smell her soap on the kitchen counter, but when he looked, the soap wasn't there. He'd buried it with her. Other things too. Her brush, her good shawl, things she'd want. He didn't light the lamp. Just sat at the table in the dark and listened to the house settle. After a while, he heard nails clicking on the porch boards. The dog appeared in the doorway, backlit by stars. It didn't come in, just stood there, testing the air. "Go on," John said. The dog sat down in the doorway. They stayed like that for an hour, John at the table, the dog in the door. Finally, John got up and found the leftover beans in the pot on the stove. He scraped them into a bowl and set it on the porch. The dog ate fast, licked the bowl clean, then curled up in the corner where the porch rail met the house. In the morning, John found the dog still there. It followed him out to the ridge when he went to check the cross. Sat beside him while he stood over Mary's grave. The wind came up from the valley and bent the grass flat. "She'd have give you a proper name," John said to the dog. "Something from the Bible probably. Ruth, or Esther, or some such." The dog looked up at him. "I ain't good with names." He walked back to the house, and the dog walked beside him, not behind, not ahead, just there, like it had always been there, like it knew something John didn't about how a thing that's broken still needs fixing. John stopped at the well and pulled up a bucket. He poured water into the trough for the horse and the milk cow. The dog drank from the spillage in the dirt. When it finished, it sat down and waited while John looked at the mountains to the west. "Crossing," John said. "That's what she'd call you. On account of you crossing over to us when we needed crossing to something else." The dog's tail moved in the dust. John walked to the barn to fork hay for the animals. The dog followed. The leather hinges on the barn door needed oil, but John had been putting that off too. Everything out here needed something. A man could spend his whole life maintaining and still die with a list of things left undone. He pitched hay into the stalls and checked the water barrels. The dog sniffed around the barn floor, investigating smells. When John finished, he stood in the doorway and looked back at the ridge. The cross stood black against the blue morning sky. The dog sat down next to him, and John reached down without thinking and put his hand on its head. The fur felt coarse and warm. "Just you and me now," John said. The dog leaned into his leg. They stood there together, watching the day come on, neither one of them knowing what was riding toward them from the east. 3 weeks after Mary went in the ground, John butchered the steer. The animal had broken its front leg in a gopher hole, and there wasn't no fixing it. He led it behind the barn, where the ground sloped down toward the creek, and shot it once behind the ear. Crossing watched from the porch, but didn't come close while John worked. The dog had learned John's rhythms by then: when to follow, when to wait, when to stay clear. John bled the animal out and started the skinning. Hard work in the September heat. Flies came up from the creek and he had to wave them off every few minutes. By noon, he had the hide off and the quarters separated. He wrapped the best cuts in wet burlap and carried them to the spring house, made 3 trips. The rest he'd smoke or salt. He was washing the blood off his arms at the well when Crossing stood up and looked east toward the wagon road. The dog's ears went forward. A low sound came from its chest. "What is it?" Crossing didn't look at him, just kept staring down the road, where the dust lifted in the distance. John dried his hands on his pants and walked to the house. His pistol still sat on the table by the door where it had sat for 2 years. He looked at it, looked back at the dust cloud getting bigger, then left the pistol where it was and went back outside. 6 riders came up the road at an easy pace. They spread out when they got close to the house, 3 on each side, and stopped their horses in a half circle around the yard. Young men mostly, except for the one in the middle who looked 40 and had a beard going gray at the chin. The bearded one touched his hat brim. "Afternoon." "Afternoon," John said. "Hot day for butchering. Animal broke its leg. That's some bad luck." The man smiled, but his eyes didn't smile with his mouth. "We've been riding since dawn. Wondering if you might spare some water for us and the horses." John pointed at the well. "Help yourself." The bearded man nodded, and 2 of the riders dismounted. They pulled up buckets and let their horses drink from the trough. The other 4 stayed mounted. One of them, a kid with yellow hair and pox scars, kept looking at Crossing. The dog had moved to sit beside John's leg. "Nice dog," the yellow-haired kid said. "Does his job." "What job's that?" "Keeping me company." The kid grinned. "Hell, that ain't no job. That's just existing." The bearded man finished his water and wiped his mouth. "You got anybody else here? Wife, hands?" "Just me." "That's a good-sized spread for one man." "I manage, I bet you do." The man looked around the yard. "At the barn, at the house, at the ridge where Mary's cross stood. You got a name?" "John Gantry." Something changed in the man's face. "Not much, just a tightening around the eyes." "That right? John Gantry. Heard that name before. It's a common name." "Maybe so." The man walked his horse closer. "We've been riding hard, and we're powerful hungry. Saw you got fresh beef. Wondering if you might part with some of it." John looked at the 6 of them. They all wore pistols, and 2 had rifles and saddle scabbards. The bearded man had his hand resting on his thigh, about 6 inches from his gun belt. "Got some steaks in the spring house," John said. "Take what you need. That's generous." The bearded man smiled again. "Real generous. You hear that, boys? Mr. Gantry here's gonna feed us." The yellow-haired kid dismounted and walked toward the spring house. He had a way of walking that said he thought he was something. 3 of the others got down to now. The bearded man and 1 more stayed mounted. John watched them go into the spring house, heard them talking and laughing inside. They came out carrying all the meat he'd wrapped, not just some of it. "Reappreciate the hospitality," the bearded man said. "You taking all of it?" Seems like the man pulled his pistol out smooth and easy and aimed it at John's chest. "Seems like we're taking whatever we want." John looked at the gun, then at the man's face. "I fed you, gave you water, and we're grateful, truly." The man thumbed back the hammer. "But gratitude don't fill saddlebags." Crossing growled. The yellow-haired kid turned and shot the dog. The sound cracked across the yard and echoed off the barn. Crossing yelped once and went down hard in the dust. John moved toward. The dog and the bearded man shot him. The bullet punched through John's left shoulder and spun him sideways. He hit the ground on his hands and knees. "Don't kill him, Dalton," one of the men said. "Just wanted his food." "Shut up, Cole." Dalton kept his pistol aimed at John. "Mr. Gantry here's got a reputation. Least he used to. Long time ago." John tried to get up and Dalton fired again, kicking dirt into his face. "Stay down." 2 of the men went into the house. John heard them inside, breaking things, throwing furniture. The yellow-haired kid walked to the barn. The one named Cole just stood there holding the meat and looking uncomfortable. "This ain't right, Dalton." "I'll tell you what's right." They tore through the place for 20 minutes, took his food, his rifle, his tools, anything that would fit in their saddlebags. The yellow-haired kid came out of the barn, leading John's horse. "Found this bay gelding. Good animal. Take it," Dalton said. John pushed himself up to sitting. Blood ran down his arm and soaked his shirt. Crossing lay 3 feet away, not moving. John crawled to the dog and put his hand on its side. No breathing. He stayed there with his hand on the dog's ribs. "Burn it," Dalton said. "The house, all of it." The yellow-haired kid went inside with a lamp. Smoke started coming through the windows, then flames. The men mounted up and sat watching the fire catch and spread. The porch collapsed first, then the roof went. Dalton walked his horse over to where John sat with the dog. "You had a nice quiet life here, Mr. Gantry. Should have kept it that way." He looked at Mary's cross on the ridge. "Give your woman my regards when you see her." He rode his horse through John's wife's vegetable garden, trampling the squash and beans, then kicked the animal into a run. The others followed. They rode past the ridge and the yellow-haired kid shot his pistol at Mary's cross as he went by. The wood splintered and the cross fell over. John sat in the dirt with his hand on Crossing's body and watched his house burn. The fire made a sound like wind. Sparks rose into the blue sky and disappeared. His shoulder felt like someone had shoved a hot iron through it, but he didn't move. Just sat there with the dog while everything he'd built turned to smoke and ash. John woke up with his face in the dirt and the sun gone behind the mountains. His shoulder had stopped bleeding, but his shirt stuck to the wound when he tried to move. He pushed himself up slow and sat there until the spinning in his head settled. The house had burned down to the foundation. Smoke still rose from the timbers. Everything smelled like ash and burned pine. John's water bucket lay on its side by the well, the metal dented where someone had kicked it. He looked at Crossing. The dog's eyes were open. Flies walked across them. John got to his feet and went to the barn. The door hung crooked on its leather hinges. Inside, 3 cows lay dead in their stalls, shot through the head. The milk cow too. His tools were gone from the wallhammer saws, the good plane Mary's father had given them as a wedding present. They'd even taken the nails out of the can on the workbench. He found a shovel they'd missed, half buried in the straw, picked it up and walked back outside. The ground on the ridge had gone hard since he buried Mary. Took him 2 hours to dig Crossing's grave next to hers. His shoulder opened up again halfway through, and blood ran down to his elbow, but he kept digging. When the hole looked deep enough, he climbed out and went to get the dog. Crossing weighed maybe 40 pounds. John carried him up the ridge and laid him in the grave, gentle as he could. The dog's fur had already gone stiff. John stood there looking down at him. "You didn't do nothing to nobody," he said. He filled in the hole. Didn't have wood for a cross, so he found 2 pieces of burned timber from the house and lashed them together with wire from the fence. Pushed it into the ground at the head of Crossing's grave. Then he walked to Mary's cross where it lay in the dirt and stood it back up. The bullet had split the crossbeam, but the upright still held. He packed dirt around the base until it stood straight. Full dark came on while he worked. Stars filled the sky, thick as spilled salt. John sat between the 2 graves and watched the barn down below, black against the last purple light in the west. He sat there until the moon rose, then walked down to the barn. The livestock smelled bad already. He'd have to burn them or bury them, but that was work for tomorrow. Tonight he had different work. He went to the corner stall where he used to keep the plow horse before it died of colic. Got down on his knees and swept the straw away from the floorboards. Found the 3 boards he'd cut special, pulled them up. The space underneath was 2 feet deep. He reached in and dragged out the wooden chest. It was heavy. Cedar wood with iron corners. Same chest his father had carried in the war. John set it on the ground and opened the lid. 2 pistols lay wrapped in oilcloth. Colt, Peacemakers, .45 caliber, 7.5-inch barrels. He unwrapped them and checked the actions. Still smooth after 2 years, he'd cleaned and oiled them before he buried them, right after Mary made him promise to put his guns away for good. Under the pistols was a belt with 2 holsters and loops for cartridges. Under that, a box of ammunition. 50 rounds. Under that, a Winchester rifle, same model he'd carried since before the war. He pulled it out and worked the lever. The action caught a little. He'd need to oil it proper. At the bottom of the chest was a wool coat, dark gray, the one he used to wear. It had bullet holes in it from 5 different occasions. Mary had wanted to throw it away, but John said no, said it was good wool and kept the rain off. Truth was, he couldn't let it go. A man's history lived in his coat. He put the coat on. Fit tighter than it used to. Mary's cooking had filled him out some. He strapped on the gun belt and loaded both pistols, filled the belt loops with cartridges, loaded the Winchester and worked around into the chamber, then let the hammer down easy. He stood there in the barn with his guns on and his father's coat and looked at himself in the reflection of the water barrel. Couldn't see much in the dark, but he could see enough. The man looking back at him wasn't the man who'd buried his wife 3 weeks ago. Wasn't the man who dug post holes and mended fence and planted squash. That man was dead now, same as Crossing. John picked up the lamp from where it hung by the door. Shook it. Still had oil in it. He lit the wick and carried it to the nearest stall. Stood there a minute, looking at the dead cow. The animal hadn't done nothing to nobody either. None of them had. He threw the lamp into the straw. The fire caught fast. Straw burned hot and quick, and the old dry wood of the barn went up even faster than the house had. John walked outside and stood in the yard watching the flames climb the walls. The roof started to go. Sparks rose into the night sky like orange stars. He watched until the walls collapsed and the barn was just a pile of burning timber. The heat pushed at him even from 50 feet away. Smoke rolled across the yard thick enough to taste. When there wasn't nothing left to watch, he walked to the ridge one more time. Stood between the 2 graves and looked down at the fires burning below. The house fire had died to coals, but the barn still blazed. The whole valley lit up orange. "I tried," John said to Mary's grave. "I tried like you wanted. The wind came up from the south and blew ash across the ridge. But I can't let this stand. You know I can't." He stood there until the barn fire started dying down, then turned and walked away from the graves. walked down through the yard, past the burning timber and the dead garden, and out to the wagon road. Turned east toward town. He had the rifle in one hand and nothing else but the guns on his belt and the coat on his back. Behind him, the fires burned down to embers. The crosses stood dark on the ridge against the stars. John didn't look back. A man couldn't look back once he'd made this kind of choice. Could only walk forward into whatever came next, and John knew what came next. 6 men had rode out of here 3 days ago. He meant to find every one of them. John walked through the night. His boots raised dust that hung in the air behind him like a pale ribbon in the moonlight. The road followed the creek bed for 5 miles, then cut through mesquite flats where nothing grew but sage and rattlesnake weed. Dawn came up gray and the wind shifted east. His shoulder had quit bleeding, but the wound pulled every time he moved his arm. He shifted the rifle to his other hand and kept walking. Town sat in a basin between 2 red clay hills, maybe 40 buildings, half of them false-fronted to look bigger than they were. John came in past the tannery where hides hung on racks, stiff as boards. A dog barked at him from under a porch but didn't come out. The corral sat at the south end of town, an acre of split-rail fence with a lean-to barn and a water trough green with algae. Silas Dunmore stood in the barn doorway watching John come up the road. He had a curry brush in one hand. John Gantry. Silas, you look like hell. Feel worse. Silas set the brush on a post and walked out into the yard. He was 60, bald as a stone, with hands so big they looked like they belonged to a bigger man. What happened to your shoulder? Got shot. I can see that. Who shot you? 6 men came through 3 days back. They take horses from you. Silas shook his head. Bought 3 paid fare. Had their own mounts besides. He squinted at John. They the ones shot you. They did. You report it to Marshal Teague. Teague still drinks. More now than before. Then no, I didn't report it. Silas looked at the Winchester in John's hand, at the gun belt under his coat. You planning to do something about it yourself? It wasn't a question, so John didn't answer it. They caused trouble at the saloon, Silas said. Busted up some furniture. One of them hit Rosa when she tried to stop them stealing liquor. Rosa's still working there. She runs the place now. Bought it from Hendricks 2 years back. Silas walked to the corral fence and leaned on it. 3 horses stood in the shade of the lean-to, swishing flies. The men you're asking about, the one doing the talking had a gray beard. Mean eyes. That's them. They asked about you. John turned to look at him. Asked what? If a John Gantry lived out this way. I said I didn't know the name. Silas picked at a splinter on the rail. Figured if they already knew you, they didn't need me confirming it. Appreciate that. Didn't do it for you. Did it because I didn't like how they asked. Silas pulled the splinter out and flicked it away. They headed northwest when they left. That was 3 days ago, like you said. John looked at the horses in the corral. A roan mare, a paint gelding, and a gray that looked like it had some Mustang in it. Need to buy a horse. You got money? No. Silas rubbed his jaw. Your credit ain't worth much if you're going after 6 armed men. Probably not. That mare's got good wind, but she's temperamental. Paint's steady, but slow. The gray's got speed and bottom both, but he don't like strangers. Silas looked at John. Course, you ain't exactly a stranger to difficult animals. I'll take the gray. Figured you would. Silas opened the gate and walked into the corral. The gray moved away, but Silas cornered it and got a rope on it. Led it out to the hitching post. Saddle's $15. Horse is $40. That's $55. You owe me. I'm good for it. I know you are. That's why I'm letting you take him. Silas threw a blanket on the gray and started cinching a saddle. You going to tell me what they did to you? Killed my dog. Burned my place. Silas stopped with the cinch strap in his hands. They burn your house. House and barn both. Jesus, John. Stole my horse too. Bay gelding. White socks on the front legs. I'll watch for it. Silas finished with the saddle and tied John's rifle to the scabbard. Rosa might know more. She talked to them longer than I did. John swung up into the saddle. The gray sidled and crow-hopped twice, but John held him steady. John walked through the night. His boots raised dust that hung in the air behind him like a pale ribbon in the moonlight. The road followed the creek bed for 5 miles, then cut through mesquite flats where nothing grew but sage and rattlesnake weed. Dawn came up gray and the wind shifted east. His shoulder had quit bleeding, but the wound pulled every time he moved his arm. He shifted the rifle to his other hand and kept walking. Town sat in a basin between 2 red clay hills, maybe 40 buildings, half of them false-fronted to look bigger than they were. John came in past the tannery where hides hung on racks, stiff as boards. A dog barked at him from under a porch but didn't come out. The corral sat at the south end of town, an acre of split-rail fence with a lean-to barn and a water trough green with algae. Silas Dunmore stood in the barn doorway watching John come up the road. He had a curry brush in one hand. John Gantry. Silas, you look like hell. Feel worse. Silas set the brush on a post and walked out into the yard. He was 60, bald as a stone, with hands so big they looked like they belonged to a bigger man. What happened to your shoulder? Got shot. I can see that. Who shot you? 6 men came through 3 days back. They take horses from you. Silas shook his head. Bought 3 paid fare. Had their own mounts besides. He squinted at John. They the ones shot you. They did. You report it to Marshal Teague. Teague still drinks. More now than before. Then no, I didn't report it. Silas looked at the Winchester in John's hand, at the gun belt under his coat. You planning to do something about it yourself? It wasn't a question, so John didn't answer it. They caused trouble at the saloon, Silas said, busted up some furniture. One of them hit Rosa when she tried to stop them stealing liquor. Rosa still working there. She runs the place now. Bought it from Hendricks 2 years back. Silas walked to the corral fence and leaned on it. 3 horses stood in the shade of the lean-to, swishing flies. The men you're asking about, the one doing the talking had a gray beard. Mean eyes. That's them. They asked about you. John turned to look at him. Asked what? If a John Gantry lived out this way. I said I didn't know the name. Silas picked at a splinter on the rail. Figured if they already knew you, they didn't need me confirming it. Appreciate that. Didn't do it for you. Did it because I didn't like how they asked. Silas pulled the splinter out and flicked it away. They headed northwest when they left. That was 3 days ago, like you said. John looked at the horses in the corral. A roan mare, a paint gelding, and a gray that looked like it had some Mustang in it. Need to buy a horse. You got money? No. Silas rubbed his jaw. Your credit ain't worth much if you're going after 6 armed men. Probably not. That mare's got good wind, but she's temperamental. Paint's steady, but slow. The gray's got speed and bottom both, but he don't like strangers. Silas looked at John. Course, you ain't exactly a stranger to difficult animals. I'll take the gray. Figured you would, Silas. Opened the gate and walked into the corral. The gray moved away, but Silas cornered it and got a rope on it. Led it out to the hitching post. Saddle's $15. Horse is $40. That's $55. You owe me. I'm good for it. I know you are. That's why I'm letting you take him. Silas threw a blanket on the gray and started cinching a saddle. You going to tell me what they did to you? Killed my dog. Burned my place. Silas stopped with the cinched strap in his hands. They burn your house. House and barn both. Jesus. John. Stole my horse too. Bay gelding. White socks on the front legs. I'll watch for it. Silas finished with the saddle and tied John's rifle to the scabbard. Rosa might know more. She talked to them longer than I did. John swung up into the saddle. The gray sidled and crow-hopped twice, but John held him steady. The Kenyan country started on the second day. Red rock walls rose up from the flatland like broken teeth. John followed game trails through arroyos where water had carved channels deep enough to hide a mounted man. The gray picked its way through shale and loose stone without complaint. He found their camp at noon on the 3rd day. Cold fire pit, horse droppings, places where 6 men had laid out bed rolls. Boot prints in the sandy wash showed them heading west into rougher country. John knelt and put his hand in the ashes. Still warm underneath. Half a day ahead, maybe less. He filled his canteen from a seep in the rocks and let the gray drink from his hat. The horse had earned that courtesy. They'd covered near 70 miles in 2.5 days, and the animal had faltered once. The trail climbed into Juniper Hills. John saw where they'd stopped to rest the horses, where one of them had pissed against a rock. He kept the gray at a walk and watched the country ahead. The old man appeared around mid. John saw him coming down a deer path on a mule that looked older than the man riding it. The man wore a slouch hat with the brim pinned up on one side and a canvas coat that might have been white once. He had a shotgun across his saddle and a beard that hung to his chest. They met where the trail widened near a stand of cedar. The old man pulled up his mule and sat there looking at John's horse. That's a fine gray, the old man said. Does the job. Where'd you get him? Silas Dunmore's corral, back in Bentwood. Silas, still watering his trough with swamp runoff. He is. The old man grinned, showing 3 teeth on the bottom and none on top. Cheap bastard. He looked at John's face, then at the rifle in the saddle scabbard. You've got a purposeful look about you. Like a man on his way to somewhere specific, the old man shifted in his saddle and the mule took a step sideways. 6 fellas came through here yesterday. Rode past me like I wasn't worth noticing. Young men mostly, except for the one in charge. John straightened. You talked to them? Didn't get the chance. They saw the mule and figured I was too poor to rob. He scratched his beard. But I seen that gray before. 2 days back, the yellow-haired kid was riding it. Had a bay gelding on a lead rope too. The bay's mine, figured it might be. The old man looked at John closer. You got a name? John Gantry. The old man's face changed. Not scared exactly, but wary. Like he'd just realized he was talking to a rattlesnake. That right, you know it. I know it. The old man took off his hat and wiped his head with a rag from his pocket. Rode with your brother once. James Gantry. This was back in '68. Running cattle that didn't belong to us across the nations. James died in '70. I heard that. Heard you went straight after. Married some woman and took up farming. The old man put his hat back on. Heard other things too. Things from before you went straight. What kind of things? That you weren't no gunfighter. That you were something worse. The old man's hand rested on the shotgun, but he didn't move it. They said John Gantry didn't stand in the street and draw on a man. Said he tracked people, hunted them, waited until they slept or ate or took a piss, then put them down like livestock. That's one way to tell it. Is there another way? The men I hunted needed hunting. The old man nodded slow. And these 6, they need hunting. They killed my dog and burned my home. That's reason enough. The old man pointed west with his chin. They're headed towards Silver Ridge, talking about some big score. The bearded one, Dalton MacLaury, he's the leader. Got a brother with him named Cole. Younger, softer. The others are hired guns, except for the yellow-haired kid, Billy Cates. He's mean for no reason except he likes it. You got all that from them riding past you. I got ears that work better than my knees. The old man grinned again, and I followed them a ways after they passed. Listened to them talk around their camp last night. MacLaury don't trust his men much. Kept saying they'd split up and meet again in Silver Ridge for the job. When they planning to split, didn't say exactly, but they're nervous. MacLaury knows somebody might come after them. The old man looked at John. Knows somebody like you. A hawk called from the rocks above them. The mule's ears twitched, but the animal didn't move. They're half a day ahead, John said. I'll catch them by dark. You catch them, what then? 6 against 1. Won't be 6 for long. The old man studied him. You really are him. The way they told it, I thought maybe it was just stories. But you're the genuine article. I'm just a man. No sir, you ain't. I've seen plenty of men. You're something different. The old man gathered his reins. I'm gonna give you some advice you probably don't need. MacLaury's dangerous, but he ain't smart. He'll make mistakes. The brother Cole, he's got a conscience. That's a weakness. Billy Cates is young and stupid. The others are just hired help. They'll run if you give them the chance. I appreciate the information. Don't appreciate it too much. I'm telling you because I didn't like how they treated me. Riding past like I was part of the scenery. The old man touched his hat brim. But I ain't helping you kill them. That's your business. He started to ride past, then stopped. Turned in his saddle. Mr. Gantry. Yet, your brother James, he was a good man. Better than most. I'm sorry he's gone. Me too. The old man rode off down the trail on his ancient mule. John watched him go until he disappeared around a bend, then turned the gray west and touched his heels to its ribs. He'd gone maybe 2 miles when he heard the shotgun blast behind him. John wheeled the gray and kicked it into a run back the way he'd come. The horse stretched out and ate up the ground. He came around the bend and saw the old man sitting on his mule in the middle of the trail. The shotgun smoked in his hands. 30 yards down the trail, Dalton MacLaury sat on his horse, holding his face. Blood ran between his fingers. His horse danced and fought the bit. You old bastard, Dalton yelled. You shot me. Birdshot, the old man said. You'll live. But you'll be picking pellets out of your cheeks for a week. Billy Cates came riding hard from the west with his pistol drawn. He saw John and fired. The bullet went wide. John pulled the Winchester and fired from the saddle. The round kicked up dirt at the gray's feet, and Billy's horse spooked sideways. Billy fought to control it. Cole MacLaury appeared behind Billy, then 3 more riders. They'd circled back. John realized, heard him talking to the old man, and set up an ambush. The old man fired the second barrel of the shotgun at Billy. The spread caught him in the shoulder and chest. Billy screamed and fell off his horse. Ride. The old man shouted at John. John fired twice more. One of the hired guns grabbed his leg and fell. The others scattered for cover. Dalton wiped blood from his eyes and pulled his pistol, but John was already wheeling the gray. He fired a last round that splintered wood from a tree near Dalton's head. The gray ran. John leaned forward and let it have its head. Behind him, guns fired. He heard bullets whip past. One hit a rock and whined off into the air. The old man's mule came pounding up beside him, moving faster than John thought possible. The old man had his shotgun broken open and was thumbing fresh shells into it. Keep going, the old man yelled. There's a draw up ahead. We can lose them in the rocks. They rode hard for a quarter mile. John saw the draw and angled toward it. The gray took the slope without slowing. The old man's mule followed. They hit the bottom, and John pulled up behind a boulder big as a wagon. The old man slid off his mule and crouched beside him. How many? The old man asked. 6, when we started. Billy's hit, maybe 1 more. That leaves 4. 4's still bad odds. Hoofbeats echoed off the rocks. John checked the Winchester. 4 rounds left. He still had both pistols full, but pistols weren't much good beyond 20 yards. The old man broke his shotgun open and checked the loads. I didn't mean to start this early. You had a choice. MacLaury was drawing on me. Didn't seem polite to let him shoot first. The old man grinned. Besides, I liked your brother. The hoofbeats stopped. John risked a look around the boulder. Nothing moved in the rocks above them. They're waiting, John said, or running. MacLaury don't seem the running type. No, the old man said. I don't suppose he does. They crouched behind the boulder and listened to the silence. Somewhere, a lizard skittered across stone. The gray stamped in blue air through its nostrils. John's shoulder throbbed where the wound had opened again. He felt blood soaking through Rose's bandage. Above them, in the rocks, something moved. Cole MacLaury crouched behind a limestone outcrop 50 feet above the draw and tried to stop his hands from shaking. His brother's face was a mess of blood and birdshot. Dalton kept spitting and cursing, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. "Can you see?" Cole asked. Ray dragged him into the shade. "He's gutshot, Dalton. All that birdshot in his chest. He gonna die?" "Probably." "Good." Cole looked down at the boulder where Gantry and the old man had taken cover. No movement. Just the gray horse and the mule standing quiet in the shade. "We should get out of here. Get Billy to a doctor. Billy's dead already. He just don't know it yet." Dalton pulled his pistol and checked the cylinder. "We're gonna finish what we started. That's John Gantry down there." "I know who it is." The old man said, "Gantry's a hunter. Said he don't fight fair." Dalton turned, and Cole saw his brother's face up close. The left side looked like somebody had pressed raw meat against the bone. Birdshot peppered his cheek and forehead, little black dots with blood weeping from each one. "Fair don't mean nothing out here," Dalton said. "Fair's what losers talk about after they already lost." Ray Thorpe came crawling over the rocks toward them. He had Pete Hindman with him, limping. Pete's leg was bleeding where Gantry's bullet had clipped him. "How bad?" Dalton asked. "I'll live," Pete said, "but I can't walk much." "Where's Virgil?" "Watching the horses." Ray wiped sweat from his face. "Dalton, we need to think about this. That's John Gantry. The man's a legend. Legends die, same as everybody else." "Maybe so, but I didn't sign on to get killed over a dog and a burned house." Dalton stood up and grabbed Ray by the shirt. "You signed on when I paid you. You'll do what I tell you or I'll shoot you myself." Ray pulled away. "Easy, Dalton. I'm just saying maybe we split up like we planned. Head to Silver Ridge different ways. Makes us harder to follow. He'll pick us off one at a time, or maybe he can't follow all of us at once." Ray looked at Cole, at Pete. "We split up, we got better odds. Meet in Silver Ridge, like we said. Rob the stage and head to Mexico with money in our pockets." Dalton looked down at the draw. The sun had moved west and shadows filled the canyon. "How long can they sit down there?" "Long as they got water," Pete said. "And that old man probably knows every seep and spring in this country." Cole watched his brother think. Dalton always got mean when he was hurt, and right now he was hurt bad. But Ray was right. They couldn't dig Gantry out of that draw without losing more men, and they needed every gun for the Silver Ridge job. "All right," Dalton said. "We split up. Cole, you take Pete. Head north and circle around to Silver Ridge through the mining camps. Ray, you take Virgil and go west through the Pueblo ruins. I'll go south through the Badlands." "What about Billy?" Cole asked. "What about him? We just leaving him?" Dalton spat more blood. "He's got a hole in him you could put your fist through. Even if we got him to a doctor, he'd die on the way. The best thing we can do is move fast and meet up for the job." He looked at each of them. "Silver Ridge, 5 days from now. The stage comes through on a Thursday. We hit it in Devil's Canyon like we planned. Split the take and ride for Mexico. And if Gantry follows," Ray asked, "then one of us kills him." Dalton wiped his face again. "He's just a man. He bleeds, same as anybody." They moved back through the rocks to where Virgil Knox sat with the horses. Billy lay in the shade of a cedar, breathing shallow. His shirt was dark with blood. When he saw them coming, he tried to sit up. "Don't leave me," Billy said. Dalton knelt beside him. "We ain't leaving you. Just going for help." "You're lying." Billy's eyes were wet. "I can see it in your face. Rest easy. We'll send someone back. Please." Billy grabbed Dalton's arm. "I don't want to die out here alone." Dalton pulled his arm away and stood up. "Should have thought about that before you ran your mouth in the saloon." He walked to his horse and swung into the saddle. His face was swelling now, the left eye almost shut. Cole watched his brother ride off south without looking back. Ray and Virgil mounted up and headed west. Pete limped to his horse with Cole's help and they rode north. Cole looked back once at Billy lying in the shade. The kid raised one hand like he was waving. Cole turned away. They rode through sunset into purple twilight. Pete didn't talk much and Cole was glad for the silence. His mind kept going back to what the old man had said about Gantry. Not a gunfighter, a hunter. "You think he'll come after us?" Pete asked when they stopped to rest the horses. "I know he will. All of us, or just Dalton. Does it matter?" Cole took off his hat and ran his hand through his hair. "We were all there when they burned his place. I didn't want to do it. Dalton made us tell that to Gantry when he finds you." Pete looked at him. "When, not if. You've seen his eyes back there, in that draw. That ain't a man who quits." They rode through the night. Cole figured distance was their only advantage now. Put enough miles between them and Gantry. Maybe he'd lose the trail. Maybe he'd go after Dalton first, since Dalton was the one who shot him, but Cole didn't believe it. Men like Gantry didn't stop until they were dead or you were. His brother had kicked a hornet's nest, and now they were all running from the swarm. Around midnight they came to a creek and let the horses drink. Pete's leg had quit bleeding, but he moved stiff. They had maybe 4 days to Silver Ridge, if they pushed hard. 4 days to get there, pull off the robbery, and disappear into Mexico before Gantry caught up. Cole looked at the stars and tried to remember why he defollowed his brother in the first place. Money, he guessed. Same reason most men did stupid things. But money didn't mean much if you were dead. "What are you thinking?" Pete asked. "I'm thinking maybe we should just keep riding. Forget Silver Ridge, forget the job, just head for the border. Dalton would hunt us down. Maybe, but at least he'd be hunting us instead of Gantry." Pete shook his head. "I'll take my chances with the job. 40,000 in silver splits. 6 ways is a lot of money. 5 ways now. With Billy dead. Billy ain't dead yet. He will be by morning." Cole knew Pete was right, but didn't say so. They mounted up and rode north toward the mining camps. Behind them, somewhere in the dark, John Gantry was coming. Cole could feel it like a cold wind on the back of his neck. The split was done. 6 men had scattered in 3 directions. Cole figured that was either the smartest thing they'd done or the dumbest. Time would tell which, but time was one thing they were running out of fast. The creek cut a 10-foot gash through the prairie, its banks lined with cottonwoods that shed white fluff into the slow-moving water. Cole MacLaury sat with his back against one of the trees, rifle across his lap, watching the trail they'd just left. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Every shadow looked like a man on a horse. Pete Hindman led their 2 mounts down to the water's edge. The bullet Gantry had put through his leg had stopped bleeding, but the muscle underneath had gone stiff and angry. He moved with a hitch, his face pale under a sheen of sweat. "He ain't coming," Pete said, his voice a low grumble. He let the horses drink, keeping a hand on the reins. "We lost him when we split up. Dalton's smart." "Dalton's face is full of birdshot," Cole said without turning. "That ain't smart. That's just getting shot. We're clear, is what I'm saying. 2 days we've been riding north. Ain't seen nothing behind us but dust." Pete splashed water on his face, then looked at his leg. "We ought to rest here a day. Let this thing heal some. We rest when we get to Silver Ridge. What's the hurry? We're meeting them in 3 days. We got time." Pete took off his hat and dunked it in the creek, letting the cool water run down his neck. He stood up straight and looked at the opposite bank. He went still. Cole saw the change in him. "What is it?" Pete didn't answer. He just stared. Cole turned, following his gaze. A man stood on the far bank, half in the shade of a willow tree. He held the reins of a gray horse. He wasn't looking at Cole. His eyes were fixed on Pete Hindman. "Heard you boys killed a dog," John Gantry said. His voice carried across the water, flat and even, no louder than the creek itself. Pete's hand, the one holding his hat, started to shake. Water dripped from the brim onto his dusty boots. "Mister, we didn't want no part of that. That was Dalton. That was all him. You were there," John said. It wasn't a question. Cole raised his rifle, trying to get a bead, but Gantry was 20 yards away, a difficult shot across the water. Gantry didn't seem to notice the rifle aimed at him. He didn't seem to notice Cole at all. Pete dropped his hat. His right hand hovered over the butt of his pistol. "Look, I got money. $40. You can have it. Just ride on." "Did you see him die?" John asked the dog. I don't know. Pete's eyes darted toward Cole, then back to Gantry. He was breathing fast now, his chest rising and falling. He was just a mutt. The first shot was so fast, Cole barely saw him draw. The sound cracked against the trees and Pete screamed, a high, thin sound. He staggered back, clutching his right hand to his chest. The pistol he'd been reaching for was still in its holster. Blood poured from a hole in the back of his hand, a clean, dark circle where the bullet had gone through bone and gristle. "God damn you," Cole yelled. He fired the rifle. The bullet kicked up mud 10 feet to Gantry's left. Gantry didn't flinch. He walked his horse down into the creek, the gray stepping careful on the slick rocks. Pete fell to his knees, cradling his ruined hand. He stared at it, his face a mask of disbelief. "You shot my hand off." John stopped the gray in the middle of the creek, water swirling around its legs. "You got another one." Cole worked the lever on his rifle and fired again. The shot went wide, splintering bark from a cottonwood behind Gantry. He scrambled backward, trying to find better cover, his heart hammering against his ribs. Pete looked up at the man on the horse. Tears cut paths through the dust on his cheeks. "I always looked up to you, Mr. Gantry. Heard stories my whole life, the things you did. You were a hero to boys like me." John watched him, his face unreadable. The setting sun glinted off the barrel of his Colt. "Hell's an even longer way to look." He fired the second time. The bullet hit Pete square in the chest, knocking him backward as if he'd been kicked by a mule. He landed on his back in the mud, his one good hand scrabbling at the hole in his shirt for a moment before falling still. The horses shied away, pulling their reins free and clattering up the bank. Cole fired one last time, a wild shot that went nowhere. Then he was running. He didn't look back. He crashed through the trees, branches whipping at his face, the sound of his own ragged breath loud in his ears. He ran until his lungs burned and the sounds of the creek were gone, replaced by the pounding of his own blood. He half ran, half stumbled for a mile before he risked a look behind him. There was nothing, just the empty prairie and the long shadows of evening. John Gantry wasn't following. Not yet. Cole knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the man was unseen in a hurry. He didn't need to be. Cole ran again. This time with the terror of a man who knows he is not being chased, but hunted. Cole ran until the sun came up, a raw bloody smear on the horizon. He'd lost his rifle somewhere back in the dark, tripped over a root and felt it fly from his hands, but he didn't stop to look for it. He still had his pistol. That was enough. He stumbled out of a thicket of scrub oak and saw the farm. A small house with a stone chimney, a sturdy barn, and neat rows of corn standing shoulder high. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and gray against the morning sky. It looked peaceful. It looked like a place a man could die. He walked toward it, trying to get the hitch out of his step, trying to look like something other than a man running for his life. He pushed open the door without knocking and stepped inside. A woman and a boy sat at a small kitchen table. The woman looked up, her hands still around a cup of coffee. She had plain, strong features and eyes that didn't show fear, only a kind of tired watchfulness. The boy, maybe 15, had a fork halfway to his mouth. He froze. He pulled his pistol, but his hand was shaking so bad the barrel drew a wobbly circle in the air. I need food, a place to rest. The woman set her cup down. You've found both, she said. Her voice was calm, like she had men burst into her kitchen every morning. But you'll lower that gun. I won't have it pointed at my son while he's eating his breakfast. Cole stared at her. He'd expected screaming, pleading. Her quiet command threw him off. Sit down before you fall down. The woman said. She nodded at an empty chair. Thomas, get the man a plate. The boy, Thomas, slid off his chair and moved to the stove, his eyes never leaving Cole. He spooned eggs and fried potatoes onto a plate and set it on the table. Cole collapsed into the chair and pulled the plate toward him. He ate with his fingers, not caring about the heat, shoveling food into his mouth like an animal. The woman watched him, her expression unchanging. You ain't scared? Cole asked, between mouthfuls, spraying crumbs. Scared doesn't patch wounds or fill a belly, mister, she said. My name is Catherine Lang. This is my son, Thomas. Cole didn't give his name, he just ate. When the plate was clean, he pushed it away and drank a whole dipper of water from the bucket by the door. His breathing had evened out. The shaking in his hands had eased. I need to sleep, he said. In the barn. Nobody comes in. Nobody. Catherine Lang nodded. The loft is dry. There are blankets in the tack room. She looked at her son, Thomas, the fence down by the south pasture. The one the coyotes have been worrying. It needs mending. Take Bessie and ride out there now. She met the boy's eyes. And Thomas. Take your time. The boy understood. He grabbed a roll from the table and was out the door without another word. Cole watched him go, a flicker of suspicion in his gut. Just chores, Catherine said, seeing his look. They don't stop just because a man with a gun walks into your house. Cole grunted. He felt heavy, the lack of sleep pressing down on him. I have no reason to try anything, Catherine said. You're just a tired man who needed a meal. He wanted to believe her. He let her lead him to the barn. The air inside was cool and smelled of hay and horses. He climbed the ladder to the loft, his boots heavy as lead. He found a pile of clean straw in the corner, pulled a horse blanket over himself, and laid his pistol on his chest. He was asleep before he heard Catherine's footsteps leaving the barn. He slept through the day. He didn't hear the sound of a second horse riding away from the farm an hour after he declosed his eyes. He didn't hear the quiet click of the rifle being lifted from its pegs over the mantelpiece in the house. Night fell. The moon rose, casting long shadows from the barn. Inside the house, Catherine Lang sat in a chair by the unlit hearth, her husband's old Winchester across her lap. She had sat there for 6 hours, waiting for the dark to get deep enough, waiting for the memory of her husband to give her the strength for what came next. He'd been a good man. He hadn't owned a pistol. He'd said a rifle was all a farmer ever needed, one to protect his land, and one to put down a rabid dog. She stood and walked to the door, her movements silent. She crossed the yard, the rifle held low at her side. The barn door was unlatched. She slipped inside. The only sound was the soft breathing of the 2 horses in their stalls, and the frantic thumping of her own heart. She climbed the ladder to the loft, each step a carefully measured movement. Cole lay on his back, the moonlight from the hay door striping his face. He looked younger in sleep, almost peaceful. The pistol had slipped from his chest and lay beside him in the straw. One hand was flung out, the other tucked under his cheek. He muttered something, a name Dalton, and shifted, turning his face away from the light. Catherine raised the rifle. It felt heavy, a dead weight in her hands. She centered the iron sight on the back of his head. He was just a boy, a tired boy who needed a meal, and he had brought a storm to her door. She pulled the hammer back. The double click was shockingly loud in the silence. Cole didn't stir. She took a breath, let it out slow, and squeezed the trigger. John found the trail where Cole MacLaury had crashed out of the creekside woods. It wasn't hard to follow. A man running blind in the dark leaves a messy track, broken branches, scuffed earth, the single boot print where he'd fallen. John let the gray horse pick its way along at a walk. There was no need to hurry. He came upon the rifle half buried in last year's leaves, its stock cracked near the trigger guard. He didn't stop for it. The sun was high when he saw the smoke from the farmhouse chimney. He reined in the gray at the edge of the cornfield and watched the place for a long time. A horse and a mule stood in the corral. Nothing else moved but the cornstalks rustling in the breeze. It looked like 100 other homesteads he'd seen, quiet and self-contained. He nudged the gray forward. Catherine Lang sat in a rocking chair on the porch, a Winchester rifle resting across her lap. She watched him ride up the lane and stop at the hitching post. She didn't look surprised. Her hands were steady on the rifle. John swung down from the saddle. He didn't reach for his guns, he just stood by the gray's head and met her gaze. "Morning, ma'am." "It is," she said. Her voice was flat, carrying no more warmth than the wood of the porch rail. "I'm tracking a man," John said. "Younger than me. Ran through here in a hurry." "He stopped running," Catherine said. She gave a slight nod toward the barn. "He's in the loft." John looked at the barn, then back at her. Her face gave away nothing. He walked past the porch, his boots raising little puffs of dust, and pulled open the barn door. The air inside was cool and smelled of hay. He climbed the ladder to the loft. Cole MacLaury lay in a pile of straw, a dark stain soaking the horse blanket beneath his head. A pistol lay near his outstretched hand. Flies were beginning to gather. John looked down at the dead man's face for a moment, then climbed back down the ladder and walked out into the sun. Catherine was still in the rocker. She hadn't moved. "He say anything before he died?" John asked, stopping at the foot of the porch steps. He said enough. She looked out toward the horizon, past the cornfield. "He said there were 6 of them. Said they burned a man's home, killed his dog." She paused, her eyes shifting back to John, holding his. "Said they were all supposed to meet up again in a town called Silver Ridge. He said a ghost was following them." John stood there, letting the words settle. Silver Ridge, that was a name he could use. "Appreciate the coffee," he said, nodding toward the pot he could see through the open doorway. The smell of it hung in the air. "You're welcome to a cup," she offered. It wasn't an invitation so much as a statement of fact. "Got miles to cover." He turned and walked back to the gray. He checked the cinch, adjusted the rifle in its scabbard, all slow and deliberate movements. He put a foot in the stirrup and swung himself into the saddle. The woman on the porch watched him, the Winchester still resting on her lap. She didn't ask his name. She didn't ask what he meant to do in Silver Ridge. She had taken care of the trouble that had come to her door, and now another kind of trouble was riding away from it. That was all the knowing she needed. John touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am." Catherine Lang gave a single, slow nod in return. He turned the gray horse and rode back down the lane, heading northwest. Behind him, the rocking chair on the porch began its slow, rhythmic creak, the only sound in the wide, quiet morning. The trading post had died with its roof caved in. What the weather hadn't ruined, scavengers had. Shelves stood empty, their boards warped. The wind moaned through a glassless window, carrying the scent of dust and sun-baked decay. It was the kind of place a man could disappear in, and that was exactly what Ray Thorpe had in mind. He stood at the window, staring out at the empty expanse of sage and rock, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in his hand. Every shadow looked like a rider. "You're gonna wear a hole in the floor," Billy Cates said from behind him. Ray turned. The yellow-haired kid sat at a broken table, using an oily rag to wipe down his pistol for the 3rd time that day. He moved with a lazy confidence that set Ray's teeth on edge. "Just watching our back trail," Ray said, and took a long pull from the bottle. The whiskey didn't warm him. "Ain't nothing on our back trail but lizards." Billy squinted, sighting down the barrel. "We lost him. Like Dalton said we would. That old man is probably still chasing his own tail back in those canyons." "That wasn't some old man," Ray said, his voice low. "That was John Gantry, and he ain't lost." Billy set the pistol down with a soft click. "You keep saying his name like it's supposed to mean something. He's one man. We're 5. He grinned, but it was a brittle thing. 4, now, I guess. Pete was always slow. Pete's dead, and Cole is probably dead right alongside him." Ray walked from the window and stood over the table. "That's what men like Gantry do. They don't get lost. They don't get tired. They just keep coming. You're scared." Billy's grin turned into a sneer. "Dalton said you had nerve. This ain't about nerve. This is about staying alive." Ray slammed the bottle down on the table. Whiskey sloshed onto the dusty wood. "We should be riding south. Right now. To Mexico. Forget Silver Ridge. Forget the damn silver." Billy stood up, his chair scraping against the floorboards. He was shorter than Ray, but he pushed his chest out like he was bigger. "We ain't forgetting nothing. We had a plan. We're gonna be rich. You think I came all this way to run from some ghost story? He ain't a story. I saw his eyes. He's the man they tell stories about, and I am the man who's gone, be drinking tequila in a whorehouse with 50 pounds of silver in my saddlebags, while you're still hiding under rocks, spooked by your own shadow. Billy jabbed a finger into Ray's chest. Dalton's counting on us. I ain't letting him down. Dalton got us into this. It was his idea to stop at that farm. His idea to burn the place. Ray knocked the kid's hand away. It was supposed to be easy. Take the beef, right on. But he had to push it. He had to make it mean. He was teaching him a lesson. Billy's voice rose, cracking with youthful fury. Showing him what happens when you get a reputation. Now we got one, too. Yeah, we got one. We're the men John Gantry is hunting. They stood there, face to face, breathing hard in the silence of the dead building. The wind picked up, rattling a loose piece of tin on the roof. Ray felt a cold dread wash over him. The kid was too young, too stupid with pride to see the truth. He was loyal to a man who would leave him to die for getting in the way. Same as he left Billy back in that canyon if the outline had gone a different way. I'm done, Ray said, his voice suddenly quiet. I am taking my share of the money we got and I am riding south tonight. The hell you are. Billy's hand dropped to his pistol. Before he could draw, they both heard it. It was faint at first, carried on the wind. A steady, rhythmic sound. Not a herd, not a posse. Just the clip-clop of a single horse moving at a steady walk. Not hurrying. Billy's hand froze over the butt of his gun. The sneer on his face dissolved, replaced by a look of sharp, animal attention. Ray turned his head slowly toward the open doorway, listening. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer, deliberate. They were coming right for the trading post. The argument was over. The whiskey was forgotten. There was only the sound, and the sudden, shared knowledge of who was making it. The sound of the horse stopped. One moment it was there, a steady, deliberate rhythm marking time toward them. And the next, there was only the wind whistling through the broken walls. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been. Get the window, Ray hissed, his whiskey courage gone, replaced by a cold, metallic dread. He flattened himself against the wall beside the main doorway, his pistol now firm in his hand. Billy Cates moved to the empty window frame, crouching low. He peered around the edge, his face tight. See anything? Nothing, just his horse, a gray, standing out there like it's waiting for a train. Billy's voice was a whisper. Where'd he go? He's circling. Coming around the back. Ray's eyes darted toward the rear of the trading post, where the roof had collapsed into a dark tangle of broken timbers and shadows. Get ready. They waited. The dust motes dancing in the shafts of afternoon light seemed to hang suspended. A piece of tin on the roof flapped once, a sharp metallic sound that made both men jump. Ray's heart hammered against his ribs. He licked his lips, his mouth suddenly dry as bone. A floorboard creaked behind them. It wasn't a loud sound, but in the dead silence of the room, it was like a gunshot. Ray and Billy spun around at the same time. He was standing in the doorway that led to the ruined back rooms, a silhouette against the bright light outside. He wasn't holding a gun. His hands were just hanging loose at his sides. He looked like he had materialized out of the shadows and the dust. Looking for 6 men, John Gantry said. His voice was quiet, with no more emotion than a stone. Killed a dog. Billy Cates recovered first. The fear on his face was replaced by the familiar sneer, a mask of stupid pride. We're right here, old man. You found us. Now what? Now this, John said. Billy's hand was a blur, dropping to the pistol on his hip. He was fast. He'd practiced that draw 1,000 times in front of broken mirrors and campfires, full of whiskey and self-importance. He was fast, but he wasn't ready. John's right hand moved. It wasn't a blur. It was just there, his Colt appearing in his fist as if it had grown from it. The boom of the shot filled the small room, a deafening roar that echoed off the broken shelves. Billy Cates staggered back a step. His pistol was only halfway out of its holster. A look of profound surprise crossed his face. He brought a hand up to his throat, where a dark, wet hole had suddenly appeared. A gurgling sound came from his lips, but no words. He dropped to his knees, his eyes wide, and then pitched forward onto the dusty floor without another sound. Ray Thorpe didn't wait to see him land. He didn't think, he just reacted. He launched himself sideways, not toward a door, but straight at the empty window frame. He crashed through it, landing hard in the dirt and shattered glass outside. Pain shot up his leg, but he ignored it. He scrambled to his feet and ran, a raw panic clawing at his throat. He had to get to the horses tied to a dead tree 50 yards away. He risked a glance over his shoulder. Gantry wasn't there. He hadn't followed him through the window. For a wild second, Ray thought he might make it. He fumbled with the reins of his roan, his fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. He got them free and threw himself into the saddle. He looked back at the trading post again. John Gantry was walking out the front door now, not the window. He moved with that same unhurried pace, as if he were just stepping out for a breath of air. He didn't raise his pistol. He just walked toward his gray horse, which stood waiting, patient as a statue. Ray kicked his heels into the roan, savagely, and the horse leaped forward, stretching into a desperate gallop. Ray bent low over its neck, the wind whipping tears from his eyes. He didn't look back again. He just rode, pushing the horse harder than he ever had before, fleeing the man who wasn't chasing him. Silver Ridge wasn't a town so much as a wound in the earth that refused to heal. It sprawled along the banks of a muddy creek, a chaotic collection of raw timber storefronts, canvas tents, and slag heaps that glittered in the afternoon sun. The main street was a river of mud, churned by the iron-rimmed wheels of war wagons, and the boots of 1,000 men who had come to tear riches from the surrounding hills. The air, thick with the smell of pine sawdust, cheap whiskey, and desperation, rang with the discordant symphony of saloon pianos and the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. John Gantry rode the gray horse down the center of the street at a walk, his eyes taking in everything. Men leaned in doorways, their faces bearded and sun-cracked, their eyes following him with a flat, assessing gaze. A prospector leading a mule, loaded with picks and pans, stumbled out of a saloon and swore at the gray for not moving faster. John didn't look at him. He was a stone in the river, letting the current of the town flow around him. He stopped at a livery barn that had hay and feed painted in faded letters on a sign that swung from one hinge. A boy no older than 16, with a face full of freckles and straw in his hair, came out to meet him. "Stall for your horse, Mr. A deep one," John said, dismounting. "Rub him down with a clean cloth and give him a double measure of oats. Water first." He handed the reins to the boy. "Cost you $1 a night," the boy said, his eyes on the Winchester in John's saddle scabbard. John watched as the boy led the gray inside. He didn't move until he saw the horse drinking from a clean trough in a corner stall, away from the other animals. Satisfied, he turned and walked back into the street, his saddlebag slung over his shoulder. He found what he was looking for across from the largest saloon, a narrow 2-story building with a sign that read, "Assire, Gold and Silver, Weighed and Bought." Tacked below, it was a smaller, hand-painted sign, "Room to Let." John went inside. The air smelled of chemicals and hot metal. A small man with a green visor, ink stains on his fingers, and spectacles perched on his nose sat at a high desk, weighing a pile of gold dust on a brass scale. He didn't look up. "Be with you in a moment." John waited. The man finished his calculations, scribbled a figure on a piece of paper, and swept the dust into a leather pouch. Only then did he turn his attention to the tall man standing before him. "Here to sell?" the assayer asked. "The room." The assayer's eyes flickered over John's worn coat, the gun belt, the hard set of his face. $2 a week. Pay now. No shooting, no women, no loud noises. You break a rule, you're out. You break a lamp, you bought it. John laid $2 silver on the counter. The assayer swept them into a drawer and produced a key. Up the stairs. Last door on the left, window looks out on the street. The room was a box. It held a narrow cot with a thin mattress, a pitcher and bowl on a rickety washstand, and one straight-backed chair. John dropped his saddlebags on the floor. He didn't care about the cot or the chair. He walked to the window. It was a good vantage point. From here, he could see the entrance to the Copper Queen Saloon, the livery, the mercantile, and most of the street in between. He could watch the town breathe. He stood there for an hour, just watching, cataloging the faces that passed, learning the rhythm of the place. He didn't need to ask questions about Dalton MacLaury or Virgil Knox yet. Men like them, coming into a town like this with a big score on their minds, couldn't stay quiet for long. They would drink, they would talk, they would make themselves known. He went to the mercantile when the afternoon shadows grew long. The place smelled of coffee beans, leather, and bolt cloth. He bought a box of 45 cartridges and a small sack of dried apples. The man behind the counter was talking to a miner whose clothes were stiff with dried mud. "Heard they're putting 4 extra guards on the stage this week," the miner said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into a bucket by the door. "Can't blame them," the storekeeper replied, weighing out John's apples. "Word is, it's the biggest shipment of the year. 40,000 in smelted silver bars." John laid his coins on the counter. He kept his voice low, casual. "What day does that stage run?" The storekeeper looked at him, his gaze lingering for a second. "Comes through Thursday. Noon, usually." John nodded. He took his purchases and walked out. He didn't need to ask any more questions. He had the place, and he had the time. All he had to do now was wait for the last 2 names on his list to appear. The Copper Queen was the town's beating heart, and its blood was whiskey. John Gantry pushed through the swinging doors just after sundown on Tuesday, and the noise hit him like a physical blow, a jangling piano. The clatter of poker chips and the roar of 100 conversations shouted over one another. The air was a fog of sweat and cigar smoke, so thick you could taste the desperation in it. He didn't go to the bar. He moved along the wall, his eyes scanning the room, and found a small, round table in the back corner. From there he could see the front door, the long mahogany bar, and the staircase leading to the rooms upstairs where bigger games were played. He sat with his back to the wall and waited. A girl with red hair piled on her head and a tired look in her eyes came over. What'll it be, Mr. Whiskey? She brought it in a thick, smudged glass. John put a coin on the table. She took it and moved on, swallowed by the crowd. He held the glass but didn't drink. He just watched. He watched miners in mud-caked boots argue over the price of silver. He watched gamblers with slick-back hair and clean fingernails play cards with the lethal calm of men who understood odds. He watched the women who moved between them, selling drinks and smiles and the illusion of luck. The man behind the bar was the center of it all. He was in his 50s, with a bald head, a magnificent handlebar mustache, and the weary, knowing eyes of a priest in a town full of sinners. He moved with an efficient grace, pouring drinks, making change, and listening. He heard everything. His name, John learned from the talk around him, was Mickey. For an hour, John just sat. He was a piece of the furniture, silent and unnoticed. Then Mickey wiped down a section of the bar, left a younger man in charge, and walked a slow circuit of the room. He picked up empty glasses, nodded to familiar faces. He was taking the temperature of the night. His path eventually brought him to John's corner. "Another?" Mickey asked, his hand hovering over the half-full glass. "This one's fine." Mickey's eyes took in the worn coat, the way John sat, the stillness of his hands. "Haven't seen you in here before. Just got to town. A popular destination these days," Mickey said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the noise. "Everyone's got silver fever. Or maybe just fever." He gestured with his chin toward a table where 4 men were playing poker. "See that fellow with the pearl-handled Remington? That's Henderson. Runs the Big Dyke mine. Pulled 100 pounds of pure silver out of the ground last week. Now he's trying to give it all back, one hand at a time." John didn't look at the card game. He kept his eyes on the room. Mickey leaned against a nearby post, polishing a glass with a clean rag. "You a mining man?" "No." The bartender nodded, as if that answered a question he hadn't asked. "Good. It's a fool's game. The only people getting rich in Silver Ridge are the ones selling the shovels. And me." He gave a small, humorless smile. "The whole town's holding its breath right now." John finally looked at him. "Why is that?" "The stage comes through Thursday," Mickey said, his voice dropping. "Biggest shipment they've ever sent out of here. 40,000 in bars. You can feel it in the air. Men get twitchy. Some are hoping to get a piece of it at the card tables. Others are thinking of a more direct approach." He stopped polishing the glass and looked John straight in the eye. "That's why the governor's sending extra guards. Word is they're putting 4 men on the box, all with repeating shotguns. A man would have to be crazy or tired of living to try and take that coach." John picked up his glass and took a slow sip. The whiskey was cheap and raw, and it burned a clean line down his throat. He set the glass down. "Men get tired of all sorts of things." Mickey watched him for another moment, then nodded slowly. "That they do." He pushed himself off the post. "Well, enjoy the whiskey." He walked back to the bar, leaving John alone in his corner. John didn't order another drink. He stayed for another hour, watching the doors swing open and shut, watching the faces come and go. He saw drunks and dreamers, killers and cowards, but he didn't see the faces he was looking for. Not yet. He finished his whiskey, stood up, and walked out into the cool night air, leaving the noise and the smoke of the Copper Queen behind him. John stood at the window of his room, a shadow in the dark. Below, the mud street of Silver Ridge glowed under the weak light of a 3/4 moon and the yellow rectangles cast from saloon windows. It was Wednesday night. The piano at the Copper Queen still played its tinny tune, but the town's energy was winding down, the drunks and the dreamers stumbling off to their beds. He had been watching for 2 days. Then he saw them. 2 riders, coming in from the east, moving at a road-weary walk. They didn't ride like prospectors. They sat their saddles with a hard authority, their horses dark shapes against the pale dust. John watched them come down the main street. The lead rider was broad in the shoulders, and even from the second-story window, John could see the man's face was a swollen, mottled mess on one side, as if he'd been kicked by a mule. The second rider was leaner, his head constantly turning, taking in the rooftops, the alleys, the dark spaces between the buildings. Dalton MacLaury and Virgil Knox. They didn't stop at the Copper Queen. They rode past the saloons and the assayer's office, continuing to the livery at the quiet end of town. John pulled back from the window. He moved without a sound, strapping on his gun belt, grabbing his coat. He was down the stairs and out the back of the assayer's office before they had finished dismounting. He kept to the shadows of the alley across the street, a ghost in the narrow space between the mercantile and the blacksmith shop. He watched Dalton hand his reins to the stable boy with a grunt. Virgil stood guard, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol, his eyes still scanning the street. They didn't look like men arriving in a town to spend money. They looked like wolves checking the perimeter of a sheep pen. A third man detached himself from the shadows of the livery's overhang. He was short, with the hunched shoulders of someone who spent his life trying to go unnoticed. "You're late," the man said. His voice was a low rasp. Dalton turned, his swollen face tight with irritation. "The road had other ideas. You Pruitt." "I am." The man Pruitt gestured with his head. "Not here." Back of the barn. John moved. He slipped from his alley, crossed the street 50 yards down, where the darkness was deepest, and came up along the back of the livery. The wall was rough sawn pine, with gaps between the boards. He found one near a corner post and put his eye to it. The three men stood in a tight circle in the moonlight. Pruitt lit a thin cigar, the match flaring for a moment on his weasel-like features. Everything set? Dalton asked. The stage runs at noon tomorrow, Pruitt said, smoke trickling from his nostrils. 4 guards. Shotguns. Just like I sent word. Virgil shifted his weight. 4 is a lot of guns, Dalton. 4 men who think they're guarding a box, Dalton growled. They ain't expecting what we're bringing. He looked at Pruitt. The spot, Devil's Canyon, 10 miles out. The road narrows to a single track between 2 rock walls. I marked a big pine on the ridge above it. You can see the road for a mile in either direction. A fallen log across the path. They'll have to stop. Good. Dalton looked around the empty yard. You seen my brother, Orthorpe? Pruitt shook his head, taking a slow drag from his cigar. Just you two. Figured you were the advance. Dalton's jaw tightened. He worked it back and forth. They'll be here. Cole knows the plan. They're just being careful. Virgil didn't look convinced. Maybe we should wait. Wait until they show. We wait. We missed the stage. Dalton snapped. The Silvers moving tomorrow. We move tomorrow. With or without them. He jabbed a finger at Pruitt. You'll be at that pine tree with our horses. The price is the same, Pruitt said. 500 now. 500 after. My part is scouting and holding mounts. Nothing more. You'll get your money when I get mine. Dalton took a step closer, his size making Pruitt look like a child. You just make sure you're there. Pruitt took a final pull from the cigar and dropped it, grinding it into the dirt with his heel. I'll be there. Your business, what happens on the road? He turned and slipped away, disappearing around the far side of the barn. Dalton stood there for a moment, staring into the darkness where Pruitt had gone. Virgil looked back toward the street. I don't like it, Dalton, Virgil said. 4 of our own gone missing. This feels wrong. What feels wrong is my face, Dalton said, touching the birdshot scars. And what feels right is 40,000 in silver. We're doing the job. Now let's get a room. They walked out of the back lot and headed for a boarding house across the street. John stayed by the wall until their footsteps faded. He had the plan, the time, the place. And he had a new name, Pruitt. He pushed himself away from the rough wood, the slivers not even registering. He melted back into the shadows he had come from, his purpose clear. MacLaury was making a plan for the morning. John Gantry was making one for the hour just before dawn. The hour before dawn owned a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the cold of a dead fire, the cold of an empty bed. Silver Ridge slept, its muddy street a dark scar between buildings that looked like charcoal smudges against a graying sky. John Gantry moved through that cold, a shadow detaching from other shadows. The livery smelled of hay, horse sweat, and manure. The sounds were of animals, sleeping, a soft nicker from a stall, the rustle of straw, the steady chewing of a horse that never seemed to rest. John bypassed the main stable area, his boots making no sound on the packed earth floor. The stable boy snored in a cot near the front, a lump under a wool blanket. John went toward the tack room at the back, a small space cluttered with saddles and bridles that smelled of leather and oil. He didn't need a lamp. His eyes had the dark. Carson Pruitt lay on a pile of horse blankets in the corner, a thin man who seemed to shrink even in sleep. He looked like a ferret curled in a burrow. John stood over him for a full minute, just watching him breathe. Then he nudged Pruitt's ribs with the toe of his boot. Pruitt came awake with a panicked snort, his eyes flying open. They were small, dark beads, and they fixed on the shape of the man standing over him. He tried to scramble up, crab-walking backward into a pile of harnesses. The jingle of the metal was the only sound. Don't, John said. The word was quiet, but it filled the small room. Who are you? Pruitt's voice was a ragged whisper. I ain't got no money. John's hand moved, and the Colt was in it. He didn't point it, he just held it. The weight of the gun was part of his voice. You scouted the stage route. Pruitt's face went slack. The blood drained from it, leaving his skin the color of dirty parchment. I don't know what you're talking about. John took a step. For a man with a bad face, you hold his horses at a pine tree. Mr. Listen, Pruitt's hands came up, palms out. That was just business, a job. I don't get involved in the rough stuff. I find trails, I hold mounts. That's it, that's all I do. Where's he staying? Who? John raised the pistol. The hammer came back with 2 clicks that sounded loud as a blacksmith's hammer in the quiet room. He pressed the barrel against the side of Pruitt's head. The metal was cold. Pruitt flinched and squeezed his eyes shut. The boarding house, he blurted, the words tumbling over each other. The one across from the saloon, the Hadley place. Room 7, 2nd floor. In the back, he came in late. Him and the other one, Virgil. The canyon, John said, his voice a low rumble. The log across the road. He's paying me to be there. Pruitt winced, his breath catching in his throat. That's all. I ain't one of them. I didn't kill nobody. I never killed nobody in my life. You knew who they were. I heard stories. Dalton's got a name. A man looking for work. Dan T asked too many questions when a man with a name comes calling. Pruitt tried to look at him, but all he could see was the dark shape of the gun. What do you want with them? John didn't answer. He watched the man tremble, saw the sweat break out on his forehead. You ain't the law, Pruitt whispered. The law don't move like you. He opened his eyes. You're the one they were talking about. The one Dalton said might be coming. The ghost. Did they kill a dog? John asked. The question hung in the air. Pruitt's face contorted in confusion. A dog? I don't know nothing about no dog. What's a dog got to do with it? John pulled the gun away. Pruitt let out a shaky breath, thinking it was over. John shifted his grip, holding the Colt by its barrel, and swung it. The heavy butt of the gun hit Pruitt just above the ear. The sound was a wet thud. Pruitt's eyes rolled back in his head, and he slumped sideways, limp as a sack of oats. John stood over him for a moment. He found a coil of rope on a peg, cut a length with his knife, and tied Pruitt's hands and feet. He used a strip torn from a saddle blanket to gag him. He dragged the unconscious man behind a stack of empty feed sacks, out of sight. Pruitt would have a headache when the sheriff found him in the morning, if the stable boy thought to look. John walked out of the tack room. The horses were still quiet. The boy still slept. He slipped out the way he came in, a piece of the night that had detached itself and was now melting back into the graying dark. He crossed the street, his boots leaving faint prints in the damp earth. The Hadley boarding house was dark, except for a single lamp burning low in the front window. Room 7, in the back. The hunt was not for the canyon. It was for the stairs. The Hadley boarding house was a place of quiet rules. No boots on the furniture, no spitting on the floor, no loud talk after 10. The low lamp in the common room cast a soft yellow light on 4 men who were obeying all of it. They sat around a circular oak table, a bottle of whiskey and a scattering of coins between them. The only sounds were the soft riffle of a deck of cards and the clink of a glass set down too hard. Virgil Knox looked at his hand. A pair of jacks. Not much. He tossed a coin into the center of the table. Across from him, a freight man named Henderson grunted and folded, scratching at the gray stubble on his chin. To his left, a young miner with hopeful eyes and dirty fingernails studied his cards as if they held the secrets to a richer vein of ore. The front door opened. The cold of the coming dawn slid into the room, raising a chill. A man stepped inside and closed the door behind him without a sound. He wore a dark wool coat with the collar turned up. He stood by the door, letting his eyes adjust to the light, a tall shape carved from the shadows. Henderson looked up from his cards, looking for a room. The man didn't answer. He moved away from the door and walked toward the fireplace, where the embers of a dying fire pulsed with a faint orange light. He stood with his back to them, watching the game in the reflection of the glass-fronted china cabinet. The young miner saw Virgil's bet and raised him. Pair of jacks ain't gonna win it tonight, Virgil. Virgil managed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He'd been jumpy since they rode into town. Dalton was asleep upstairs, snoring like a man without a care, but Virgil couldn't rest. He'd come down for a drink, and the drink had turned into a card game. He looked at the man by the fireplace. Something about his stillness made the hairs on Virgil's arms stand up. Your bet, Virgil, Henderson said, his voice a low grumble. Virgil looked back at his cards. He pushed another coin into the pot. I'm in. He watched the stranger in the reflection. The man turned from the fireplace and walked toward their table. He moved with a purpose that made the quiet room feel small. He stopped behind the young miner's chair. He wasn't looking at the cards. He was looking at Virgil. Friend of yours? Henderson asked, his eyes narrowing. The fourth man at the table, a quiet bookkeeper who worked for the mining office, folded his cards and pushed his chair back an inch. Virgil stared at the man's face. He'd seen it before, in the firelight of a burning farm. A face hard as rock, with eyes that held a look he remembered from a cornered wolf he'd seen once. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. This was not a man. This was the reason Cole was missing. The reason Pete and Ray and Billy were gone. You're him, Virgil said. The young miner turned in his chair to look up at John. Mister, you're spoiling the game. John's gaze didn't leave Virgil. Virgil's left hand rested on the table, near his cards. His right hand was below the table, hidden from view. He could feel the smooth, worn grip of the Colt tucked into his belt. We heard you was dead, Virgil said, trying to keep his voice steady. You heard wrong, John said. The bookkeeper stood up, knocking his chair over in his haste. He backed away from the table without a word and hurried out of the room. Henderson and the miner looked at each other, then at the gun belt visible under John's coat. He stood, and the young miner scrambled to his feet alongside him. They left their coins on the table and walked quickly toward the stairs, leaving Virgil alone with the man who had followed them across 100 miles of bad country. The room was silent now, except for the ticking of a mantel clock. Virgil felt the beat of it in his own chest. His right hand tightened on the butt of his pistol. Dalton's upstairs, Virgil said, a desperate offer. Room 7, you can have him. I'll walk out of here. You'll never see me again. Virgil's face tightened. The dog, it was always the dog. It made no sense. He made his move. He pulled the gun and brought it up, leveling it under the tabletop. John's hand moved. It wasn't faster. It was just sooner. He had seen the decision in Virgil's eyes a full second before the man's muscles obeyed the command. The Colt Peacemaker appeared in his hand, an extension of his will. The single shot was a flat, brutal crack that shattered the boarding house quiet. The bullet hit Virgil in the chest, just above the oak of the table. It slammed him back in his chair. The gun in his hand fired, a deafening roar aimed at the floorboards, sending splinters flying. A look of surprise crossed his face. He looked down at the dark, spreading stain on his shirt. Then back up at John. His mouth opened, but only a wet, gurgling sound came out. The cards in his left hand slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor. He tried to say something else. His eyes held a kind of dawning, terrible question. He leaned forward, his face pale in the lamplight. "What was we to you?" he whispered, the words thick with blood. John Gantry stood over him, the smoke from his pistol curling in the still air. He watched the last light go out of Virgil's eyes. He didn't answer the question. He didn't have an answer Virgil would have understood. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving the ticking clock to measure the silence. The gunshot was not a loud sound upstairs. It was a dull, flat thump, like a heavy book dropped on the floorboards below. But Dalton MacLaury was not asleep. He lay on his back on the narrow cot in room 7, his clothes still on, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a sleeping town. He had been listening for the silence to break. He sat up, his boots hitting the floor. He knew that sound. It was the sound of a pistol, fired indoors. Another muffled boom followed a second later. Virgil's gun. He guessed, a reflexive shot into the floor. Dalton didn't move toward the door. He didn't call out. He knew who was downstairs. The ghost had found them. The plan for the silver stage, the $40,000, the ride to Mexico, all of it dissolved into a single, cold certainty. He had to run. He moved to the window at the back of the room. It overlooked a muddy alleyway and the dark shape of a woodshed. He slid the window up, the dry wood groaning in protest. The cold air hit his face, sharp and clean. He swung one leg over the sill, then the other, and dropped it 10 feet to the ground. He landed with a grunt, his knees jarring from the impact. He didn't pause. He ran, keeping low, a shadow moving through other shadows, his mind empty of everything but the livery barn. The livery was no longer quiet. A lantern hung from a beam, casting a flickering, yellow light. The stable boy, awake now, stood near the entrance, holding a pitchfork like a weapon, his young face pale with fear. "Heard a shot," the boy said, his voice cracking. "From the Hadley place." Dalton ignored him. He pushed past the boy and went straight to the stall where his horse, a big roan, stood shifting nervously. He pulled the saddle from the rail where he'd left it and threw it on the horse's back. His hands worked with a frantic, clumsy speed, fumbling with the cinched strap. "Hey," the boy said, taking a hesitant step forward. "You gotta pay for the night's keep." Dalton turned. The swollen side of his face was a mottled purple in the lantern light. His eyes were wide, hunted. He pulled the pistol from his belt, and the boy froze, the pitchfork suddenly looking small and useless in his hands. "Get back," Dalton snarled. He finished with the cinch, pulling it brutally tight. He didn't bother with a bridle, just looped the lead rope around the roan's jaw. He led the horse out of the stall and swung himself into the saddle. He rode the horse out of the barn at a trot, then kicked it into a gallop once he hit the street. He didn't look back at the Hadley boarding house. He didn't ride east, toward Devil's Canyon and the silver he had killed for. He turned the horse south, toward the jagged, broken country of the Badlands. He rode like a man pursued by hell itself, leaving the sleeping town and the last of his men behind him. John Gantry stepped out of the boarding house 2 minutes later. The front door was open. Henderson, the freight man, peered down from the top of the stairs. John met his eyes for a second, then walked out into the street. The air was cold and thin. He could hear the frantic hoofbeats of a single horse, already fading in the distance to the south. He walked to the livery. The stable boy was still standing in the doorway, his knuckles white on the handle of the pitchfork. He took his horse, the boy said, his voice trembling. "The big fella. He pulled a gun on me." John nodded. "Saddle the gray." He didn't hurry the boy. He waited while the saddle was cinched, the bridle fitted. He checked the straps himself, then untied the gray's reins from the post. He swung into the saddle. The horse was fresh, its movements easy and strong. The first hint of dawn was a pale, gray line on the eastern horizon. The tracks were clear in the damp dust of the street, sharp-edged and deep. The trail of a man riding too fast, running too scared. A fool's trail. John nudged the gray with his heels. The horse moved into a steady, ground-eating walk, following the tracks that led out of Silver Ridge and into the empty, lawless land beyond. The town was at his back. His list was down to one name. The Badlands began where the last of the grass gave up. The ground broke apart into a maze of rust-colored canyons and sawtopped ridges. A land baked and cracked by a sun that offered light but no warmth. It was a place that cared nothing for the men who entered it. Dalton MacLaury rode his roan into this broken country with the desperation of a man who mistakes a labyrinth for a hiding place. He pushed the horse hard for the first few hours, its sides heaving, its coat dark with sweat. He rode through a narrow wash where the rock walls rose 100 feet on either side, then cut sharply west, riding up a steep scree slope where the horse's hooves sent a cascade of loose rock clattering into the silence. At the top, he reined in, his chest burning, and looked back. There was nothing, just the empty sun-blasted landscape. He let out a ragged breath. Maybe he'd lost him. Maybe the ghost of Silver Ridge didn't like the heat. John Gantry was not lost. He kept the gray at a steady walk, a mile behind, a pace that ate ground without killing the horse. He saw where Dalton had pushed the roan too hard, the prints deep and splayed. He saw where the horse had stumbled on the scree slope. He read the trail not as a line to be followed, but as a story of the man who made it. The story was one of fear. By midday, Dalton knew he was still being hunted. He couldn't see him, but he could feel him, a cold pressure on the back of his neck. He tried another trick. He found a creek bed, its stones bleached white by the sun, and rode downstream for a quarter of a mile, the hard rock leaving no trace of his passage. He then urged the roan up the far bank, a difficult climb that left deep gouges in the clay, and doubled back, heading north into a cluster of hoodoo spillers of rock carved by wind into unnatural, watching shapes. He found a shallow cave set back in the rock, more of an overhang than a true cavern. It was high enough to hide the horse. He tied the roan deep in the shadows, then took his rifle and scrambled up the rocks above the cave mouth. He found a perch between two boulders that gave him a clear view of the creek bed below. He laid the rifle on the warm stone, chambered around, and waited. The silence of the badlands settled around him. The sun beat down, sweat trickled from under his hatband, stinging the birdshot scars on his face. An hour passed, a hawk circled high overhead. The heat shimmered off the rocks. Dalton's throat was dry as dust. Then he saw him. John Gantry rode the gray horse out of the wash, moving at that same damnable walk. He stopped the horse at the edge of the creek bed. He didn't look up. He dismounted. He took his canteen from the saddle, uncorked it, and gave the horse a long drink in his hat. Dalton centered the rifle's sight on the man's back. It was a long shot, maybe 200 yards. The man stood there, patient, letting the horse drink. Dalton's finger tightened on the trigger. John finished watering the horse. He straightened up, put the canteen away, and turned his head, his gaze sweeping the rocks on Dalton's side of the creek. He wasn't looking for anything. He was just looking. His eyes passed over Dalton's position without a flicker of recognition, but Dalton felt as if the man's gaze had pinned him to the rock. He hesitated. John mounted the gray. He rode it into the creek bed, following the path Dalton had taken. He was a perfect target. Dalton lined up the shot again. His heart hammering, he pulled the trigger. The rifle's roar shattered the silence, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. The bullet kicked up a puff of white dust from a stone 10 feet to John's right. The gray horse shied, but John held it steady. Before the echo of the shot had died, he was off the horse and behind a slab of fallen rock near the creek's edge. "I see you, Gantry," Dalton yelled, his voice raw. He worked a lever on his rifle. "You ain't a ghost. You're just meat on a horse." There was no answer. Dalton fired again. The bullet winged off the rock John was using for cover. A high, angry sound. A puff of smoke blossomed from the base of the rock. The shot came a second later. The bullet struck the boulder a foot from Dalton's head, sending a spray of stone chips into his face. He flinched back, cursing. He risked a look. Gantry was gone. The horse was still there, standing patient as a statue, but the man had vanished. "Show yourself, you coward!" Dalton screamed, the words swallowed by the vast, empty space. Another shot came, this one from 50 yards to the left. The bullet ripped through the sleeve of Dalton's coat, a hot kiss of lead and cloth. He scrambled back from the ledge, his heart trying to claw its way out of his chest. Gantry had circled. He'd crossed the creek bed without making a sound and was coming up the rocks. Dalton didn't wait for a third shot. He slid and stumbled down the backside of the ridge to the cave, his hands raw from the sharp rock. He untied the roan, threw himself into the saddle, and kicked the horse into a desperate, lunging run. He rode out of the cluster of hoodoos and into the open, pushing the horse south again, deeper into the broken land. He looked back once. John Gantry stood on the ridge where Dalton had just been. The sun was a red wound, bleeding on the western horizon. It threw long, distorted shadows that turned the badlands into a place of monsters. Dalton MacLaury saw a monster in every rock, a hunter in every shadow. He rode with his head turned, looking back, always looking back. The roan under him was laboring, its breath a ragged saw in the cooling air. The horse was almost done, and Dalton knew it. Ahead, the land fell away into a wide, shallow basin thick with sagebrush. Its silvery leaves turned a bloody orange by the dying light. A steady wind pushed out of the north, rustling through the dry stalks with a sound like whispering. An idea, born of pure animal panic, took root in Dalton's mind. He had one advantage left: fire. He urged the roan down into the basin. In the center, he swung down from the saddle. The horse stood with its head low, its flanks trembling. Dalton pulled the last 2 matches from his vest pocket. He knelt and struck one. The flame sputtered in the wind. He cupped it with his hands and touched it to a clump of dry brush. The leaves ignited with a hungry hiss. He lit another, and another. The fire caught. It spread slow, at first, a creeping line of orange. Then the wind took it. A wall of flame roared to life, racing south across the basin, consuming the sage with a sound like a freight train. Black smoke boiled into the twilight sky, thick and choking. Dalton laughed, a raw, cracked sound. He pulled himself back into the saddle and rode to the southern edge of the basin, to a narrow cut in the rocks that was the only way out. He turned the horse and watched the fire. He had built a wall between himself and the world. He had built a wall between himself and Gantry. Let the ghost ride through that. John Gantry saw the smoke from 2 miles away. He stopped the gray on a ridge overlooking the basin and watched the fire spread. He felt the wind on his face, noted its direction. He watched the solid wall of flame and the thick plume of smoke it threw ahead of it. A man running from a fire would ride away from the smoke. A man hunting didn't have that luxury. He nudged the gray, not south, away from the fire, but west, riding parallel to the advancing flames. The smoke rolled toward him, acrid and blinding. The gray tossed its head, its eyes wide, but it trusted the man on its back. John pulled the bandana from his neck and tied it over his nose and mouth. He rode until he found what he was looking for, a place where the sage thinned near a rocky outcrop. The fire here was a broken line, not a solid wall. He turned the gray and rode straight into the smoke. The world disappeared. It was a hell of swirling ash and stinging eyes. The roar of the fire was a physical presence. John let the gray pick its own way, his hand resting on its neck. They moved through the blinding gloom for what felt like an hour. Then, as suddenly as they had entered, they were through it. Dalton saw him first as a flicker of movement in the smoke, an impossible shape where nothing should be. He thought it was a trick of the heat and his own frayed nerves. Then the shape solidified. The gray horse, its coat dusted with ash, stepped out of the rolling black cloud. The man on its back was a specter, his face covered, his eyes fixed on the pass. He moved at that same unhurried walk. Dalton's moment of triumph curdled into sheer terror. He brought the rifle to his shoulder and fired, a wild, unaimed shot. The bullet went nowhere. John didn't fire back. He just kept coming. Dalton worked the lever, his hands shaking. He fired again. The bullet screamed off a rock near the gray's feet. John raised his own rifle now. He fired once from the saddle. Not at Dalton. The bullet hit the roan high in the chest. The horse screamed, a terrible high-pitched sound of pain and surprise. It staggered, its front legs buckling. It went down hard, throwing Dalton from the saddle. His leg was caught for a moment under the horse's weight, a flash of white-hot pain shooting up to his hip. Before he tore it free, he scrambled away from the dying animal. The roan thrashed in the dirt, its legs kicking at the empty air. Dalton had lost his rifle in the fall. He didn't look for it. He pulled his pistol and fired twice at the shape in the smoke. He saw no sign he had hit anything. He ran, his leg was afire of its own, but he ran. To the south, high on a dark mesa against the last of the light, he saw the broken silhouettes of ancient buildings. Pueblo ruins, stone walls. Cover. He half-limped, half-crawled up the steep slope of the mesa. Rocks cut his hands. His lungs burned with the smoke and the effort. He didn't look back. He could feel Gantry's eyes on him. He reached the top and stumbled into the ruins. He found a small, windowless room, its roof long gone, and collapsed inside. He crawled to the crumbling doorway and began pulling loose stones into the opening, building a makeshift wall. He worked until the opening was sealed, then collapsed in the total darkness, his breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. He was trapped. John Gantry did not climb the mesa. He rode the gray horse to the base of the steep slope and dismounted. The fire in the basin behind him had burned itself out, leaving a blackened, smoking scar under a sky full of hard, bright stars. The air tasted of ash. High above, the Pueblo ruins were a jagged crown of black against the deep indigo of the night. He could feel the man up there, a nod of fear in the vast silence. He did not build a fire. He unsaddled the gray, rubbed the animal down with a fistful of dry grass, and picketed it where it could graze on a few stubborn patches of saltbush. From his saddlebags, he took a piece of jerky and a small sack of oats for the horse. He sat with his back against a rock, facing the mesa, and ate the tough, dried meat. He was not a man in a hurry. He had all the time there was. The sun came up the next morning and painted the rocks a brilliant, merciless orange. The day grew hot. John found a sliver of shade under an overhang and sat there, his rifle across his lap. He cleaned the weapon with a small oiled cloth, his movements slow and methodical. He watched the ruins. He saw the loose pile of rocks Dalton had used to block the doorway. Nothing moved. Around noon, a voice came from the top of the mesa. It was rough, cracked with thirst. "Gantry, I know you're out there. You want me? You gotta come get me." John finished cleaning his rifle. He worked the lever, the action making a smooth, oiled click-clack. He set the weapon down beside him. "You hear me?" The voice screamed. "This is a big place. You could look for a week and never find me." John uncorked his canteen and took a small sip of water. He swirled it in his mouth before he swallowed. An hour of silence passed. The sun climbed higher. The heat was a physical weight. "Listen to me." Dalton's voice was weaker now, pleading. "There's money. A lot of it. I was gonna take the Silver Ridge stage, 40,000 in silver bars. I'll split it with you, 60-40, just right away, and I'll leave your share somewhere you can find it." John took a dried apple from his saddlebag. He bit into it. The flesh was tart and sweet. He chewed slowly. The rest of the day passed in silence. The sun set. The rocks bled their heat into the cool night air, and the stars returned. John slept for a few hours, his head on his saddle, one hand resting on the stock of his rifle. The second day was the same as the first, only hotter. The silence from the ruins stretched until mid-afternoon. When the voice came again, it was a dry, rasping croak. "Water, Gantry, please, just a little water." John stood and walked to the gray. He checked the horse's hooves, picking out a small stone that had gotten wedged in the shoe. The horse nuzzled his shoulder. "I'm sorry." The voice from the ruins shrieked, the words breaking apart into a sob. "About your dog. I didn't mean for that to happen. It was just a mutt. I'm sorry. You hear me?" John ran a hand down the gray's neck. He looked up at the stone walls on the mesa, his face giving nothing away. He was not listening to a man. He was listening to a cornered animal making noises. The third day dawned clear and bright. The heat started early. John knew the man on the mesa could not last another day. Thirst was a patient hunter, more patient even than him. He was watching the blocked doorway when the first stone moved. It slid from the top of the pile with a dusty scrape. Another followed. A space appeared, a dark slash of shadow in the sun-bleached wall. Dalton MacLaury burst out into the sunlight. He was not a man anymore. He was a wild, shambling thing, his face blackened by sun and dirt, his eyes wide and mad. He held his pistol in his hand, but he wasn't looking for a fight. He was running, stumbling down the rocky slope toward the south, away from John, away from the ruins, running for a freedom that wasn't there. John raised his rifle. He had been sitting in the same spot for 2 days, waiting for this moment. The weapon felt steady and familiar in his hands. He tracked the running man, the iron sights lining up on the center of Dalton's back. He lowered the barrel a few inches, to the man's right leg. He took a breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was a single, sharp crack in the morning stillness. It echoed once off the high rock walls. Dalton's leg flew out from under him. He went down hard, tumbling head over heels in a cloud of red dust and loose rock. He landed in a heap at the bottom of the slope, a broken puppet with its strings cut. A scream, then an animal, tore from his throat. The world was dust and the sharp, grinding edges of broken bone. Dalton MacLaury lay at the bottom of the slope and stared at his leg. It was twisted the wrong way, the boot pointing at a sky that was too bright, too blue. Pain was a white fire that burned from his hip to his heel. He tried to move, to push himself up with his elbows. He managed a few feet, leaving a thick, dark smear in the red dirt. The boots appeared first. Worn leather, scuffed at the toes, coated in a fine layer of dust. They stopped 10 feet away. Dalton quit trying to crawl. He let his head fall back and looked up the long frame of the man standing over him, a black silhouette against the punishing sun. "You broke my leg," Dalton rasped, the words thick with dirt and disbelief. John Gantry did not answer. He just stood there, the Winchester held loose in one hand, pointed at the ground. He watched the man in the dirt the way a farmer watches a snake with a broken back. Dalton dragged himself another foot, his arms trembling with the effort. His pistol was gone, lost somewhere in the tumble down the hill. He had nothing left but his voice. He spit a mouthful of bloody dust. "All this," he croaked, gesturing with his head at the empty, silent landscape. "For what?" He looked at John's face, a mask of stone and shadow, and saw no answer there. He tried again, his voice rising, a sneer twisting his cracked lips. "It was just a dog." John walked forward. He stopped when his boots were a foot from Dalton's head. He looked down at the man, at the swollen birdshot scarred face, at the wild fear in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was low, flat, with no more heat than the rock under his feet. "You burned my home." He let the words settle in the silence. "You killed my animals." He watched Dalton's eyes shift, the sneer faltering. "You shot down my wife's cross." Dalton saw the truth then. It wasn't in John's words. It was in the dead, empty space between them. There was no bargain to be made. There was no mercy here. His fear burned away, leaving only a core of pure, venomous spite. He pushed himself up on his elbows, a last act of defiance. He spit. The glob of saliva landed on the toe of John's boot. "You were already dead inside, old man." Dalton snarled, the words tearing from his raw throat. "We just made it official." The words hit John, but not like a punch. They were a key turning in a lock he had forgotten was there. He looked past the broken man on the ground, his gaze turning inward. He saw Mary's face, the way she smiled when he fixed the porch steps. He felt the weight of the shovel in his hands as he dug her grave. He remembered the promise he'd made her, to put the guns away, to be the man she saw in him. He had tried, he had built a life on that promise. Dalton hadn't killed that man. He had just dug him up. The man who stood here now, under the badlands sun, was not the farmer, he was the hunter. The journey back was 2 days of methodical torment. John tied one end of his picket rope to Dalton Eastwood's ankle and the other to his saddle horn. He mounted the gray and rode at a walk, heading east. Dalton MacLaury was dragged through the dust and rock of the badlands he had chosen for a battleground. He screamed at first, then cursed, then pleaded. John did not look back. He just rode, his eyes on the horizon, the rope a taut line between him and the thing he was pulling. He stopped only to water the gray from his canteen. He offered none to the man on the ground. By the second day, Dalton had stopped making noise. He was a dead weight, a sack of broken bones and sun-scorched flesh, leaving a long dark trail in the dust. John rode into Silver Ridge just after noon. He didn't come in fast. The gray walked down the center of the muddy street at its steady, unhurried pace. Men stopped what they were doing. Faces appeared in windows. The piano at the Copper Queen went silent. The town held its breath. They saw the tall, quiet man on the gray horse. Then they saw what he was dragging behind him. John rode straight to the building with the faded sign that said sheriff. He stopped the gray and dismounted. He untied the rope from his saddle horn and let it fall. He walked up the 2 wooden steps and went inside. The man behind the desk was older than John had expected, with a thin mustache and tired eyes that had seen too much greed and not enough justice. A tin star was pinned crookedly to his vest. He looked up from his paperwork as John's shadow fell across his desk. "Help you?" the sheriff asked. "Got a body for you?" John said. "They're a bounty on Dalton MacLaury." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He stood and walked to the doorway, looking out at the street. He stared at the motionless shape in the dirt. At the end of the rope, he looked back at John. "That's him. That's him." The sheriff let out a long, slow breath. He walked back to his desk and sat down. $200. Wanted for robbery in 3 territories. Him and his brother. He pulled a ledger from a drawer and opened it. He had a gang. 5 others. He looked up at John, a question in his eyes. "You see them out there?" John stood in the middle of the room. The dust of the badlands was on his coat, on his boots, on his soul. He did. The sheriff stared at him. He looked down at the names listed in his ledger. Cole MacLaury, Pete Hindman, Ray Thorpe, Billy Cates, Virgil Knox. He looked at the quiet, unmoving man standing before him. He closed the ledger. He didn't need to ask how. He didn't want to know. He counted out $200 in gold coin from a lockbox and pushed it across the desk. John took the coins. He walked out of the office and back into the sunlight. A small crowd had gathered, watching from a safe distance. They parted for him as he walked to the mercantile. Inside, he bought flour, coffee, a side of bacon, and a small keg of nails. He paid the storekeeper, who wouldn't meet his eyes. He carried the supplies to the livery. The boy with the straw in his hair saddled the gray without a word. John loaded his supplies, lashing them down with a practiced efficiency. He rode out of Silver Ridge the same way he had come in. At a walk, he didn't look back at the body in the street or the sheriff standing on the boardwalk. He didn't look at the faces that watched him from every saloon and storefront. He had finished what he came to do. He rode east toward a burned-down homestead and 2 crosses on a ridge, leaving the whispers of Silver Ridge to fade into the dust behind him. The ride east was a journey through memories. John passed the ghost of a trading post, its bones bleaching in the sun. He rode through the canyon country where the ghost of an old man had offered him advice. He crossed the creek where the ghost of Pete Hindman had begged for his life. With every mile, the land grew softer, the red rock giving way to dusty flats and tired grass. The air smelled less of stone and more of earth. He smelled the homestead before he saw it, a cold, lingering scent of charcoal and ash that the wind had not yet managed to scour away. The gray horse stopped on its own at the turnoff from the wagon road. The place was a ruin. A black rectangular scar on the ground showed where the house had been. A larger, more chaotic square of blackened timber marked the barn. The vegetable garden Mary had tended was a tangle of dead vines and weeds. The silence was absolute. John dismounted. He let the gray's reins drop to the ground. He didn't look at the house or the barn. He looked up at the ridge. The 2 crosses still stood, stark and lonely against the afternoon sky. One was larger, its crossbeam split by a bullet. The other was smaller, cruder, made of 2 burned pieces of wood. He walked toward them, his boots making no sound in the soft dirt and ash. The climb was the same, but the man making it was different. He reached the top and stood between the 2 graves. Weeds had begun to grow on the raw mounds of earth. He knelt first at the smaller grave. He pulled the weeds, his fingers working the soil. He took the crude cross and set it deeper, packing the earth around its base until it stood solid and true. He found a few flat stones nearby and laid them over the mound, a small cairn to hold the ground in place. He rested his hand on the stones. He didn't speak. There were no words for the dog. He moved to Mary's grave. The cross Dalton's man had shot stood crooked. He worked it loose. The split would roughen his hands. He set it straight, packing dirt and rock around it until it would not move. He cleared the weeds from her mound, his hands gentle. He ran his fingers over the burned letters of her name. Mary Gantry. Beloved, he had said he tried. He had told her that. The night he left, he knew now that wasn't the whole truth. He hadn't just tried, he had failed. He had promised her peace, and he had brought a firestorm down on her memory. The man she had tried to build was buried here, too. He stood up. He stood there between the two graves as the sun went down, the sky bleeding out from orange to purple to a deep star-littered black. The wind came up, cold and clean, whispering through the grass on the ridge. It was the only sound in the world. He felt the weight of the 6 men he had killed. It wasn't a heavy weight. It wasn't a light one. It was just a weight he would carry. It was the price of the dog. It was the debt for the cross. When the moon was high and the ruins below were just patches of deeper shadow, he walked back down the ridge. He didn't go to the foundation of the house. He walked past it, his steps deliberate, and stopped at the edge of the burned-out barn, where the earth was soaked in the ghosts of fire and slaughter. He stood there for a long time, looking at the blackened ground, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. John took the shovel from his saddle pack. The blade was new, the handle smooth and unvarnished. He walked to the corner of the burned barn where the floor of the plowhorse's stall used to be. The earth was black and hard-packed. He drove the shovel into it. Digging was different this time. His shoulder didn't ache. The work was just work, a rhythm of steel and earth. An hour passed. The sun climbed higher. The shovel struck wood with a hollow thud. He cleared the dirt away and found the lid of a small cedar chest, its corners bound with brass. It wasn't the iron-strapped chest that had held his guns. Mary had asked him to make this one for her, to hold things she called keepsakes. He'd buried it for her when the sickness first took hold, when she worried about a fire or a flood taking everything. He lifted it from the hole. It was light. He carried it to the stone foundation of the house and set it down. He opened the lid. There was no smell of oilcloth and steel. The scent was of dried lavender and old paper. On top lay Mary's Bible, a small book with a worn leather cover. Beneath it was a small cloth-wrapped bundle. He unwrapped it and found her wedding ring, a simple gold band, and a stack of letters tied with a blue ribbon. His letters to her, and hers to him. John built a fire in the center of the foundation, using kindling from a dead scrub oak. He made coffee in a tin pot and fried 3 strips of bacon in a small pan. He ate slowly, the first real meal he had cooked on this ground since the day he buried her. When he was done, he untied the blue ribbon. He sorted through the letters until he found the last one she had written, the one he had found on her pillow. He had only read it once. Her handwriting was thin, the loops of the letters shaky, but the words were clear. He read it again by the light of the small fire. It spoke of small things, the way the sun hit the ridge in the morning, the taste of water from the well. It spoke of her fear, but more of her peace. He came to the last lines. I am not afraid for me. I am only afraid for you. The man I married was a ghost, John. He carried too much with him, but I did not love the ghost. I loved the man who planted a garden with me. I loved the man who fixed the porch steps, even if it took him 2 years. I loved the man you were trying to become. Please, when I am gone, do not let the ghost have his house back. He folded the letter and put it back with the others. He sat by the fire as it burned down to coals, the letter's words settling inside him. He had let the ghost out. He had let it hunt, and now it was fed, and it was quiet. At dawn, John stood. He took the letter, and the Bible, and the ring, and placed them back in the cedar chest. He closed the lid. He carried the chest up the ridge and buried it between the 2 graves, marking the spot with a single, flat stone. He returned to the barn. He took the shovel and dug a new hole, deeper this time, where the cedar chest had been. He went to his saddle, took the Winchester from its scabbard, and laid it in the bottom of the hole. He went to his room in town, gathered his gun belt, and returned. He unbuckled the belt and coiled it, the 2 heavy Colts in their holsters. He laid it on top of the rifle. He filled the hole in. He rode the gray back to Bentwood. At the lumberyard, he used the last of the bounty money to buy a wagon and fill it with fresh-cut pine boards, 2 kegs of nails, and a new set of tools. 3 days later, the sun beat down on John's back, soaking his shirt with sweat as he worked. The air no longer smelled of ash, but of fresh-cut pine. The silence was broken not by gunfire, but by the clean, ringing sound of a hammer striking a nail. Over and over. He drove one nail, then another, his muscles burning with a clean ache he had not felt in years. He worked past tired, past sore, until the work was all there was. A rider appeared on the road, a dark shape against the afternoon glare. John saw him. His hammer stopped mid-swing. His body went still, a lifetime of instinct coiling in his gut like a cold snake. The old ghost was not gone. It only slept. The rider slowed his horse and stopped at the edge of the property. He looked at the stacks of lumber, at the half-built frame rising from the old stones, at the lone man working just passing through. The stranger said, his voice friendly, "Saw what happened here. Figured you could use some help with that." John stood motionless. He looked down at his own hands, calloused and raw from the hammer, not from a pistol grip. He looked back at the stranger, who sat patient on his horse, waiting for an answer. The silence stretched, holding the weight of a choice. It was the longest moment of John's life. He gave a single, slow nod. "Could use an extra pair of hands."